I'm Edwin Warfield. I'm the publisher of City Biz. I am honored today to interview Tom Davidson, the CEO of EVERFI. Welcome, Tom.
It's great to be here.
Can you tell us about EVERFI's founding mission and why the company you built is more relevant today than it's ever been before?
Sure. EVERFI started about 12 years ago, and our entire mission was to really build this learning layer that was missing from K-12 public schools, colleges, and ultimately in the workplace. That was just such a gaping hole. Students don't learn anything about financial education, insurance literacy, navigation of the healthcare system, understanding student loans, and the preparation for college. We spin out millions of students in a generation who graduate and have to really learn these things by mistakes. And EVERFI builds out really powerful online curricula that help teachers bring that before students and help families negotiate and navigate those pretty tough issues.
Can you provide a snapshot of where EVERFI is today, the number of schools, the number of students, the number of adult learners, some of your strategic partners?
Yeah.
And how's this year changed your view of the company and the work that you do?
Well, it's been quite a year. I don't think anything could have emphasized enough, whether we like it or not, how important it is to have equity in education, how important it is that students have equal access to technology and devices and broadband, how important it is that schools be ready to turn on the dime and provide learning in very difficult environments. And I think lastly, what it showed us was really that we were missing something in the curriculum of schools. And it was a great opportunity for EVERFI to really step up and provide that. So we've got about 43 million learners that have been certified by our programs, about 6.3 million students who get certified every year. We run two of the largest courses in the world, which are our higher ed courses. And we've got about 38,000 to 40,000 public schools who use our software to teach these really critical life skills. And our partners, what's been great about it is, I think the key to our business model is recognizing that school districts are under enormous pressure from a budget perspective and only getting worse. It's going to be a very, very tough time in public school funding. This is, Edwin, as you might remember, this is the world that I came out of. I was a state legislator for a number of terms and spent a lot of time thinking about how you fund these types of things from the public sector side, which really led me to the belief that you had to build a really vibrant and deep and resilient funding mechanism that existed in the private sector to pay all of this stuff for students. And so we've convened a fascinating group of people from the NHL and the NFL and Major League Baseball to UBS and Morgan Stanley and Truist to the largest retailers like Walmart and Amazon, all the way over to really fascinating technology companies like Facebook and Google and others to provide this to their learners at no cost.
Can you tell us a little bit about your community engagement platform and how it works in concert with your programs?
Sure. So the community engagement operating system, or we call it CEOS, is really something that's incredibly innovative and we think very needed in the market. About a year and a half ago, you started to really see a lot of voice and a loud voice being given to this issue of stakeholder capitalism, that it wasn't just shareholders who should benefit from the corporation, but that employees and customers and suppliers and shareholders and everyone all had a stake in a company, an institution doing the right thing in their communities, and that you needed to be judged by more than just the share price. And so that move on stakeholder capitalism, which has been building in social impact and the role of the organization, the role of the company, of the corporation in their local communities, became a very different thing. And the measuring stick became very different. Employees were walking in every day saying, what are you doing? What's our place in local schools? What's our place, how we train each other? Like, do we do pay and gender equity audits? Do we do training on harassment in the workplace? Do we do, things internally? Are we being the right kind of steward in our community that we feel like we should be? So there's a lot of pressure building up from customers and from employees on that front. And what you really had was you had to go harvest the parts of like 1,000 different things that were happening inside of a company. And what we felt like was that all of that content, those efforts eventually needed to land in one place where the executive leadership could report on that both internally and externally. Are we doing unconscious bias training? Are we doing diversity and inclusion training? Are we doing pay audits as it relates to the race and gender of our employees? And then externally, what are we doing in local schools? Where are we contributing? How's it being used? How many students are going through it? And having that all be in one place is kind of the ledger of record of impact. We call it impact as a service. And that's something that's never existed before that we've kind of created from scratch. And we think it's a very big missing piece of the ecosystem. We now have about 3,100 organizations that range from the biggest universities to the biggest corporations in the world who use that.
So your platform generates metrics. Can you explain how these metrics works?
Yeah, so it'll have everything as pedestrian as usage metrics, number of hours spent, pre and post assessments, changes in knowledge, understanding of knowledge flow, all the way over to we do very specific behavioral questioning and impact studies within the software itself. We do a lot of climate surveys that you can compare a corporation to a corporation, an institution or a campus to another campus. That gives us a lot of, there's a benefit to having one platform that's doing this for everyone, because you get that comparative data that you never, could really glean as you were doing it in a silo alone.
So how was EVERFI able to pivot the delivery of education to students during COVID?
During COVID, yeah, it's it explains my pure white hair at this point. Listen, it wasn't easy. Everyone, I think, makes the assumption that being an ed tech company was wonderful in this moment. It's been as hard, we are by no means doing the heroic work of frontline workers, but we still require a lot of on-campus hand-holding, a lot of on-campus professional development, technical enablement. We run a lot of orientations in person to get people both activated on the software and troubleshoot on the software. When that all came to a screeching halt, it was quite a change for us. For the first time in 12 years, we had to do our business very differently. What's exciting about this is just from a company perspective, we're growing through it. We've also, and going to grow substantially this year over year, than we did last year. But I think what's even cooler about this is we've been able to build things on the fly, using our software and using our school network very quickly to do things like returning to the workplace safely, returning to campus safely, having very COVID and coronavirus specific content and learning actually baked into the software very quickly that allowed our very large customers to use it and disperse it out to their constituencies in a way that was fast and meaningful. So it has by no stretch been easy. We're not a remote company, and we've all been remote, this entire time as the whole world has. So that's nothing unique, but still, I think sometimes we have to shake ourselves and realize that it's been quite a journey over the last 217 days since we walked out of the office for the last time.
And what role did the school districts and the teachers play in this?
Well, listen, I mean, we need to, one, give every one of these people a massive raise, and two, we need to buy them a drink, because it's I don't think anyone who has children, I have 4, and watching our teachers have to move so quickly and pivot so quickly on this, they deserve, a hero's party after this is all done. I think one of the things that you found was we still have a long way to go for making sure that technology and ownership and broadband and is not equitably dispersed and distributed right now. And that just needs to stop. This is not a nice to have. And it's not I spent a lot of time on this in the mid 90s. I was working on legislation in the legislature and the Universal Services Fund and E-rate and other things where we were trying to build connectivity and to schools. But this country it just has to realize that this is a public utility, It's not something that needs to be bought at a store or anything. This is a public utility. And we need to shift our thinking for students, that students in the highest poverty areas have access to broadband, have access to devices, have access. This is a must-have, and teachers need the type of training so that when this does open back up, that it's not just that we go back to the way it was, but that people can harness the power of education technology in a way that's equitable, because it's real. It allows you reach, it allows you scale. It's not a replacement for teachers, but it is an absolute must-have for any teacher in the classroom going forward.
Last year in 2019, EVERFI made its first international acquisition. Can you tell us a little bit about the acquisition and your expansion plans?
So it's a wonderful company called EdComs, which is based in London, with operations across the Middle East and Europe. What we found was most of our largest partners, these are going to be Fortune 1000 companies, were not taking a provincial and kind of local approach towards their impact. They wanted this to play out in Hanover, New Hampshire, and in Hamburg, Germany, and beyond. And so we needed a vehicle to be able to do that, and we could have either built it, but we found just an amazing partner with those folks over there and made that acquisition at the end of 19, which now gives us the ability to go to any of our partners and deploy a type of community engagement and social impact strategy across the globe. It's really important for us, and we hope when the world opens up and we can get back to traveling internationally, that we'll be able to really maximize what we know is the opportunity there.
In September, EVERFI announced a $100 million 3-year commitment to address systemic social injustice and economic inequality through free digital educations to our nation's schools. How will this effort work to close the gap that leads to long-term inequities?
So we feel like we've really identified and nailed our place in this. We all, I think, need to pick our battles, and this is one that I think we're willing to go hardcore at. What we wanted to do was we had a roadmap for the next 3 years of the types of things that we wanted to build, things that taught young people how to navigate the healthcare system, taught young people how to navigate food security assistance and other things, taught young people how to navigate insurance and understand it, how to understand the next generation of payments, and build a culture of savings and retirement in a country where it's just there's a devastating fact pattern of people not having enough emergency savings, so that when something like COVID hits or whatever the next thing will be, and there will be hurricanes and natural disasters and all types of things that knock us off our feet, that people have some cushion and have the tools that they need to build wealth and to navigate. These are systems that are rooted in some really painful parts of our history. And when you think about the tragedy of redlining and the impact that had on home ownership and wealth creation, if you think about the lack of funding to minority-owned small businesses, when you think about the lack in funding of local schools in high poverty areas because of a really fractured mill rate, funding formula that was different everywhere, it was an unfair fight. And so we feel like if we can build systems of learning that students have to go through as a part of their normal school day for things that dramatically affect their trajectory in their lives, things like crushing debt, things like payroll or payday lending cycles that you can never get out from underneath, that create cataclysmic cycles of poverty for generations. If you think about the inequities of funding for student loans and other things, access to capital, we think that's something that can be taught. We think it's something that can be ingrained in learning, and we think it's actionable and can happen, like tomorrow. So that's our place, and that's this $100 million commitment, is to spend that, building that into the infrastructure of local schools.
You recently posted on social media about MassMutual's long-standing commitment to financial literacy education for middle school children. Can you tell us about what a program like this really means?
Yeah, so if you think about this, this is a company, in this case, Mass Mutual and Roger Crandall and Dennis Duquette, and an incredible group of people who have put their money where their mouth is. They've talked about how important financial education is in schools. And I think instead of just providing lip service to it and writing a blog or something, they stepped up to the table with a $50 million, 5-0 commitment to bring this to every single middle school in the country. And it is those types of what I think are catalytic moves that ensure two things. One, that this learning gets there, but two, that this learning stays there. This was a multi-year commitment so that superintendents and teachers and others know this isn't a one and done thing. They know they can begin to build their school day, their curriculum, the time in class around the idea that this will be there. One of the challenges is in education is this yo-yo effect of, President Bush is president one day and President Obama is the next, and President Trump is the next, and who knows who the next president will be. But this yo-yo effect of not knowing whether it's race to the top or no child left behind or whatever the flavor of the day or the month is by the local superintendent, the local mayor, the governor, we feel like EVERFI can be the one enduring piece that doesn't get yo-yoed and whipsawed and in and out of people's lives depending on budget cycles. And that's what we're trying to build. I think it's a really important thing.
So EVERFI has attracted a range of marquee investors, including New Enterprise Associates, Allen and Company, and Bonner's Fund. Can you walk us through just a quick overview of the institutional funding?
Yeah, so we really intentionally, it's a really great group of people, and they're all folks who've really just achieved a level of excellence in their lives, both as investors and in their day jobs. In some cases, Jeff Bezos, Eric Schmidt from Google, and Ev Williams from Twitter, and a TPG and their new Rise Fund. So we've raised somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, $300 million or something along the way from all of those folks. And I think for us, it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But when you think about the opportunity, number one, and then also just the crushing 400-year history in this country alone of what has been stacked against communities all across this country, particularly our communities of color, where our brothers and sisters there have had to play by a very different set of rules, which I think is just tragic and unacceptable. But we're going to try and do our best to bring a new optimistic approach to and a lot of money, frankly, to go after these systemic issues of learning and our place, we think, in the ecosystem.
So can you tell us, I listened to one of your interviews and you have some interesting thoughts on leadership, which I'd love for you to share. One of them is, what is the role of optimism in the CEO?
Well, I think it's one of the most important things that a CEO can have. And I think it's important to distinguish optimism from happiness. I'm not always happy, for sure. But I try and be always optimistic, which means you don't walk around with bluebirds, flying around your head, but you have a sense that things are far more possible that you want to pull off than they are not. I think it's also being optimistic, if it's done right, it usually is accompanied by a pretty healthy dose of candor and transparency. We're not all great at that. And all business, environments tend to have some politics associated with it, and that's fine. But I always have a saying that I tell people. I think it's the first thing when they walk in the door. I say, stab people in the heart and praise to the back. Stab in the heart and praise to the back, which means be willing and have the courage and the toughness to shut the door and just tell people what you think. Don't be passive aggressive and don't, mumble it under your breath. So stab them in the heart when you got tough news. But also walk around and praise people behind their backs. I love it when somebody calls me and says, she just did an extraordinary job. And I love it when the rumor mill is going on behind people's backs in a good way, because I think that builds a culture that people that you want to be in a foxhole with and fight the type of fights that we're all trying to pull off here.
And can you share some of the lessons you've learned from some of your individual investors?
Yeah, I think that, so a couple of different things. Number one is, Jeff Weiner is a real mentor of mine. He's a longtime CEO of LinkedIn. Jeff is really focused on building a culture of compassion. We actually, from his work of building compassionate, business leadership, built out a course for very young people and really understanding the definition of compassion. In the case of running a business, being a compassionate leader, understanding not just what it's like to walk in someone's shoes, but to see and act and do and recognize that often people need a champion, on their side. The second thing is, you never know what's going on in people's lives. We all have our stuff going on behind the scenes. And I think it's just critical to recognize that compassionately. And then, a couple of other things. We have the opportunity to watch, some of our investors who've built just some of the biggest technology companies and software companies and other things. I think the recognition that anything that is important, takes just a level of intensity, just a massive level of intensity. And I think you often forget that it never gets a whole lot easier. I think when you're in year 2, you look at the folks who are in year 6 and you're like, man, that must be so much easier than this. And when you're in year 6, you look at the folks in year 10 and you say that much would be so much easier that she's got it on autopilot now. And sitting here at year 12, it feels harder and more interesting and more challenging than it ever did. So I think like that true sense of like self-care and like this is a marathon of like intense sprints. And when you get your head around the fact that that's what being an important company. And again, this will either be a really big company or it won't, and we'll try our hardest to make it so. But it's really more like if you're an important company and you matter, that's a pretty intense journey. And, it's not about yoga and free, granola in the workplace and having your dog at your desk or whatever. I mean, that's all fine and we'll do that stuff. But that it is about the mission being tied to an extraordinary level of intensity to go after that and making sure that you've got it in the tank and that you're building a culture, like a type of really inclusive culture that recognizes you're going after something bigger than yourselves.
I'm blessed to have you share your vision in an area that DC we're a little anxious about, that you show us a ray of optimism, and that you are my favorite social impact company in the world. So keep up your important work, and thank you for your time.
Gosh, blessings. Thank you so much. Best of luck. Be well.